What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another live edition of Seahawks Forever. The NFL Scouting Combine officially in the books, but if you haven't gotten enough Combine content, well, you're in luck because we have more for you tonight. Michael Thompson, old friend of the show. It's been too long since he's been on. Really excited to get his draft insights tonight, what he saw on the field in Indianapolis, who he thinks the winners and losers were, who the best Seahawk fits would appear to be coming out of the workouts in Indianapolis. And then we'll do a 7-round Seahawks mock draft that he's put together with a little bit of a surprise in the first round. Can't wait to see what you all think of it. Have your questions ready for Michael as well. That's coming up next on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
This episode brought to you by Doer, built for doing lifestyle apparel for all occasions. And if you haven't heard me talk about them up until now, you're going to continue to hear me talk about these stretch performance jeans. They are my go-to. 20% stretch. They move with you. They're incredibly light, but they're also built to last. Built for doing, antibacterial, breathable material as well. They have flagship stores in Denver and LA, but you can get everything you'd like on shopdoer.com. That's spelled D-U-E-R. Right now, if you go to shopdoer.com/forever, they'll give you 20% off your first order. That's 20% off your first order by shopping at shopdoer.com/forever. All right, let's bring Michael Thompson into the show. It has been a minute, my friend, since we've gotten together and talked draft. Far too long. Of course, you have the history with 12th Man Rising and also something else coming up. I don't know if you want to talk about that yet today or not, if it's time to make it official, but always good to get your thoughts on the draft. How are you?
I'm doing good, Dan. Thanks for having me on. Always fun. Getting ready to start that draft season. I feel like the Senior Bowl definitely is that first taste. And then once the combine hits, it feels like, oh, it's real. It's happening. Free agency starts here pretty soon. The offseason is officially here. And super excited to announce that in the very near future, I'll be joining Field Goals. Super thankful to Mookie, Alexander, and his team for adding me on. And hopefully I don't screw up too much, but I'm really excited to join their team. They got some awesome stuff going on over there.
I do not see that as being an issue, my friend. Good to know that you're joining Field Goals. It's funny. Everything kind of comes full circle, right? Like all the guys that I've met through doing this, and this particular show was sort of born out of the Field Goals podcast that I used to do with Dana. And then, through that met Bryce Coots, got to know you a little bit better, and now you guys are joining Field Goals. It's all one big happy family. Tell me this.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, like, that does, getting to join Field Goals doesn't happen without your help and stuff, and you having me on and listening to me send you mock drafts 500 times a day and stuff. So I appreciate you, Dan, for this opportunity.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's talk about big picture first, and then we'll kind of narrow it down to the Seahawks needs and fits. This draft class, kind of heading into the college season all the way through it, and then even into the early part of the scouting process or the draft process, kind of been labeled as one that was lacking at the top. Some people even called it a bad draft a couple of months ago. And now we've heard about the depth after the top. While the top may be lacking in blue chip talent, that it's a pretty deep draft. Has anything happened over the last few weeks, Senior Bowl, the All-Star circuit, and now Indianapolis, to sort of shape your opinion of this draft class? Has it changed any?
I think I'm kind of been in that minority of people that have actually been somewhat high on this draft. If you're hoping for a franchise-altering player in the 20s or even the teens, this is probably not that draft for you. But this is, as everyone says, the meat and potatoes draft. And that's something I've been strongly have believed for a while. I think there is going to be more red chip type of players. A couple Pro Bowl players, guys that you're going to see in conference championship games, guys you're going to see in Super Bowls that are going to play a role in these big games. They may not be the guy that you see on the poster for the Super Bowl, but there's a lot of interior help in the NFL on the offensive and defensive side of the football that we're going to see. I think when we look back, you're going to see a ton of second contracts for a lot of these top 100 picks. Again, may not be as many superstars as we normally see. A lot of that is because the lack of quarterback appeal in this draft compared to last year, which is just kind of a timing thing. But I really think, and we saw at the combine, there is some real Pro Bowl level immediate contributors in this draft that I've had some people tell me, hey, this draft's maybe not as good as you think it is. I definitely have a more optimistic viewpoint than a lot of people do when they kind of do this scouting process. But I think that the Senior Bowl in the combine just really hammered home a key part of this draft for me, and that is the fact that you can find immediate help at certain positions that make a massive impact in the NFL today.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And I think one of the reasons is when you look at this class overall, there's just so many guys that have played a ton of football. Like as they were running through all their drills yesterday, it doesn't matter, regardless of the position group, it's spread out throughout all the positions, 35 starts, 40 starts. And that used to be the exception to the rule and not the rule. And I think sometimes that takes a little bit of the shine, some of the excitement out of a draft, because fans and even some, analysts and experts and you hear about draft fatigue, but sometimes we get more enamored with the potential upside and sort of the mystique of a player that has a smaller sample size, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think a perfect example is, probably my biggest draft crush is Donovan Jackson. I think he is my number one offensive line prospect to be the best left guard in college football last year, in my opinion, or one of the best, and then to be the most dominant left tackle on a national championship team this year. His tape in the college football playoff is pristine. It's unbelievable. If he was a redshirt sophomore, I think he goes in the top 10. But he's played a bunch of games. He came back. He's just some of those guys that, like you just said, a lot of guys that have those 40 or 50 games, it's kind of in a way maybe being held against them, or they're so solid that you have so much tape that you've seen enough bad things. I mean, if you give me 50 games of tape, I'm going to find flaws. You give me 50 games of Patrick Mahomes, I'm going to find a few duds. Oh, yeah. He's still one of the 5 greatest quarterbacks to ever walk the face of the earth. But it's just that experience and stuff. And this is a unique thing as we're kind of that final wave. We're ending those extra years that we're kind of seeing here in college football with those extra games. And there's just a lot of prospects that you have a lot of tape, good and bad on. Doesn't mean that they're a good or bad player. It just means there's a lot on there, which is great for evaluating. And it should make these draft picks a higher percentage of getting them right, hopefully.
I think Mahomes is a great example of your point because, he wasn't a slam dunk prospect coming out of Texas Tech. He was very polarizing. There were some who thought he was just way too reckless, way too much of a gunslinger, horrible mechanics, just didn't look the part of traditional quarterback. And some thought that the Chiefs were nuts for moving up all that far to take him at what, 10?
Yep.
And yet then you look at a guy like, we'll talk about the quarterback class here in a minute, but like Quinn Ewers, right? He's barely 21 years old, doesn't turn 22, I don't think, until later this month. So I guess he's not barely 21, but you get my point. He's already played, I think he started 35, 36 games. And so people that, want to nitpick quarterbacks, which seems to be sort of a cottage industry these days, it's easy to find mistakes that he's made on tape or bad reps or bad throws or whatever. Whereas everyone's already anointed Arch Manning as the next great quarterback and the one that all these teams are going to be clamoring to get up to the top of the draft for next year, when he's only started 3 games and very possibly might not come out after just one full-time year of starting. But it's the allure of what could be and sort of the legend that precedes him. Whereas I think we look for reasons to knock some of these other guys down, right?
Yeah, I mean, not to get too philosophical, but it's definitely this culture that we're in right now where it's the newest thing. It's what's next, what's the new hot thing. And I mean, we see it now. People are excited to see Mahomes get crushed in the Super Bowl because it's winner fatigue, right? People got really tired of seeing Tom Brady, and even the first dynasty that Tom Brady had, we kind of grew up with that. And then the next generation got tired of the second dynasty and stuff. It's only a matter of time before it's what's next, what's the new thing. And, that's for fans and not for the NFL executives to decipher.
So I asked you to kind of give me a couple of lists, winners, losers, and then we'll get into some guys that you really like as Seahawk fits. But who are some of the guys that that maybe not necessarily that blew away the combine that you were expecting to blow the combine away, but some of the guys that kind of caught you by surprise?
Yeah, I think when you're looking, I'm trying to think of like day one, which was the defensive line and the linebackers. I think from the defensive line, nobody had like that, oh my gosh, that Anthony Richardson, Will Levis type of like wow moment at the combine. But I thought the guys that I'm looking at that I'm interested in did what I wanted to see. Darius Alexander, Derek Harmon. A guy I've been really high on is Tonka Hemingway.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of really good players on that South Carolina defense. That's a team that probably should have made the college football playoff, and it would have been fun to see that team with the next guy we're going to talk about and at their safety position. But Tonka Hemingway is a guy that's a mid-round pick that I think is just a plug and play decent contributor. I think that's a guy that you're going to see on playoff teams. And I thought he did a good job. He didn't run his 40, but what do you have for his vert was 32. His cone was 7.36. I know his athleticism score came out as an 85 on the Combine IQ on the NFL site. He looked great but I think the defensive tackle, there's some good ones. A lot of them didn't participate, which is probably one of the biggest things I'll take away from this combine is how many people didn't participate, which is what it is. But on the edge side, Shamar Stewart did good, helped himself a few more picks higher up. Landon Jackson probably might have even shot up a full 20, 25 picks. That's a guy that I think before the combine, a lot of people had kind of the comment that good player, a little stiff. That he did not look stiff at the combine. That looked like an absolute athlete that I think some defensive coaches would love to get their hands on, coach them up a little bit. A big guy for me, I know we'll talk about him later though, is Jahad Campbell. Did everything I wanted to see for what I think his potential is. James Pierce was a very polarizing player. You can say he was a big winner because he had one of the fastest 40 times ever for an edge rusher. But there was stuff behind closed doors and whispers that came about his personality, all the way, not just from Indianapolis, but all the way in Knoxville of this guy might be a character risk and stuff, which, this is the time of the year. This is where these, for better or for worse, these 20 to 22-year-old men are going to get, critiqued more than ever before. And that could be someone's downfall. That could also be someone's blessing in disguise if he ends up in the right situation. Arm length's not really my look for that. You go to the wide receivers and the cornerbacks on the next day. I thought that Darian Porter, his 40 time, that body, everything that is the potential there, screams the number one corner. I think a lot of people have already said it. I see a lot of Reek Woolen potential there. His tape is a very Big 12 cornerback tape, a lot of hits and a lot of misses. But that's another guy I would love to see Mike McDonald get his hands on. Wide receiver, I thought Matthew Golden became the number one wide receiver in the draft class. I thought he looked absolutely number one material. I think his tape in the college football playoff showed a guy that can be a number one receiver. He's going to be right in that range for Seattle. I think that's going to be I think we will see a couple mocks with the future of Tyler Lockett unclear. And a lot of people are going to be like, why would you select another wide receiver? That's because he's a number one wide receiver, in my opinion. And he looked the part. His tape looks the part. Let's see who else. Harrison did really well out of Kentucky. I think I missed him earlier. He didn't do any of the drills, or he did the drills, but none of like the testing. But Mason Taylor looks like a number one type of tight end.
Right.
He's got the bloodline. His body type is within, I think, 2 or 3 pounds of what Travis Kelce is. They just look like big, giant wide receivers. And I think that's kind of what Mason Taylor is. He strikes me as the kind of guy that might be a seam god. You just run him. And I think that's one of Geno Smith's skill sets if he's the quarterback this season for Seattle. And then quarterbacks, Jackson Dart, again, I think solidified himself as a top 35, top 40 pick. Shedeur Sanders, I think it's been talked about a lot. People wanted to see him throw because he doesn't look like a number one pick quarterback, but he's being talked about in that sense. And then again, kind of like James Pierce, some whispers. I can't remember his name. He does the insider information for CBS. He kind of hinted at Shedeur was kind of dogging the interviews for teams that he didn't want to go to.
Yeah, and McVay today came out and said he talked to two front office members from teams that need a quarterback that are drafting in the top 10, and they both came away. He said they used different words to say the same thing to me, that they both came away feeling like he didn't care about that interview, didn't care what they felt about him, which would indicate that he definitely has his preferences and that maybe he's even been, promised by a couple of organizations that he does like or does want to go to that he won't get past them.
Yeah, he strikes me as someone that has something decided between Vegas, New York, maybe if at worst case scenario sits for a year behind Matt Stafford and the Rams. Like it just strikes me very NBA like. You get these teams these players that pulled themselves out of everything because they were given a promise, and you don't hear about that very often in the NFL. But maybe this is one of those cases where the Jets are like, hey, we're, if you're there at 7 and Cam Ward isn't, we're taking you, type of a thing. I wouldn't take him at 7, but to be that confident, I think he's got some good information that makes him feel like he doesn't need to do everything that you normally do when you're in this beauty pageant type of situation.
Yeah. A couple guys you had on your list that you sent me earlier that really, really surprised me. And I keep going back to inside linebacker is kind of a tough one for me in this draft. It's not a great inside linebacker draft. Stop me if you've heard that before the last few years. But, in looking for a guy that might be someone that could be interchangeable with Ernest Jones and Tyrese Knight, assuming Jones comes back. And I kind of think, especially by what the Seahawks PR team has been tweeting out the last couple of days with highlights of Jones, I think that's only a matter of time. But, Drake Thomas is your third linebacker right now. So would love to get a guy in there that can maybe play some Mike and some weak. And so I'm always looking for these bigger linebackers because they're such a rare breed these days. There's a couple in this draft, guys like Demetrius Knight. But Danny Stutzman was one coming into this draft that I thought, well, that's a guy that kind of has more prototypical size. He's a little longer and he's a little heavier and he'll come up and stack and shed, but he probably can't move well enough. Right. And then he goes out and has a terrific combine. Like, to me, just completely changed my entire profile on that guy. Now you're an Oklahoma guy, right?
Unfortunately, yep.
You've been watching him more closely than I and most of us. What are your thoughts on a guy like that?
Yeah, kind of the benefit of being a fan of a team is I've, fortunate to have watched every single snap that Danny Stutzman has ever played as a big Sooners fan. And he was the heartbeat of a very good defense that defense was college football playoff level defense. And they kind of gave way towards the end of the season because that offense was just so horrible. But he has been the heartbeat of a very difficult time in Oklahoma with some transition, expectations not being filled. But this dude always came out, always performed, always looked the part. But yes, he definitely looks like a 1998 middle linebacker. He does not look like your modern prototypical linebacker. And then he goes to the combine, and I believe he ran a 4.59 or 4.52 or something like that. Just absolutely blew me away with some of his numbers. I got it right here, a 4.52. That'll work in the NFL at a linebacker spot. So for his size, his instincts, his experience being really the leader of that defense at Oklahoma for the last 3 years, if he can come in and give you valuable special teams minutes and then push a Tyrese Knight and be there as a protection if Ernest Jones gets hurt. I don't think Ernest Jones has had any injury concerns that I have known about over the years with the Rams and his brief moment with the Titans. But that's you need 3 linebackers in the NFL just to get through what is a 17-game season. And if you're hoping to play 19, 20 games, you need that third linebacker. And that's a middle round guy that you could possibly get that I think would be a fantastic add, bias aside.
Yeah, 4.52, 155, 10-yard split, a 34-inch vertical at 6'3" for a 6'3", 233-pound white guy. Like that kind of jumps off the page, right? Can he cover?
Yeah, I think he can. Like I said, if you watch the first 6 games of that Oklahoma tape, you see a guy that's like, oh yeah, that guy looks like he will be your NFL team's favorite defensive player for the next 4 or 5 years. Just that guy that's going to be a fantasy football machine. He's going to get you 10, 11 total tackles in the game and stuff. And
Yeah.
I think he can hold it. The 4.52 shows that he can hit those hooks from the running backs. That's what we need. I feel like as a Seahawk fan, we watched, unfortunately, all the greatness of Bobby. We watched also that Pete Carroll scheme. Teams just check down to running backs on us to death. And Danny strikes me, and Ernest and Tyrese, these are the kind of guys that have the athleticism to do that. Tight ends, I'm a little bit nervous with him against tight ends and stuff because he got cooked a little bit. The old Miss game is not a great tape. But if you watch the majority of that Tennessee game when it looked like Tennessee was the number one team in the country and Oklahoma kind of gave the game away on national television, that defense made Nico, Nico, I can't remember how you say his name. Levea, who's going to be a top. Yeah, Nico, he's going to be a top 5, top 10 pick in next year's NFL draft.
Right.
Danny got a huge sack on him and looked good in those things. So the potential is there.
He didn't do the short shuttle or the 3-cone. Maybe there's a reason for that. He knew he wouldn't test well, saving that for his pro day. Those might tell us a little bit more about some of those abilities. And then everybody wants to know about the offensive linemen in the Pacific Northwest because it's the focal point really of most of the discussion, for good reason. Even John Schneider has acknowledged, I think, a little bit more transparently in the last couple of weeks than he ever has, that it's the biggest problem on the roster, and it's one that they intend to make a priority and to fix. So what did you see just kind of overall from that group yesterday, interior and guys that can play tackle?
Yeah, I thought, I think I tweeted it out, this is going to be a special offensive line draft. I think there is a strong, heavy amount of about 15 to 17 guys that are going to get second contracts like that in the NFL. Just, again, maybe not like the superstar, we're taking this franchise left tackle. And that's why, again, this is just such a unique draft where the players that really drive up the appeal or what kind of gets people talking and make them think, this is a really special draft, is the quarterbacks. It's the left tackles. It's kind of like the premier edge rushers. We don't really have that Will Anderson. We don't have that Trevor Lawrence type of hyped prospect. We don't have that franchise left tackle, that Walter Jones, that Jonathan Ogden type of guy. But in the middle, in the interior, there are dudes on the defensive line and there are dudes on the offensive line. And we saw that. Membo absolutely pushed himself into probably the top 10 with the way he performed in the combine. Whether you want to play him as a right tackle or you want to play him as a monster on the interior, he can move, right? Honestly, probably the perfect pick for what Seattle's going to start doing under the Shanahan or the Kubiak offense. He ain't going to be there at 18. All those mocks of Membo at 18, it's time to let those go, right? And so that he's kind of like the big star. Booker, I don't think he had the greatest performance, but in the drills, he looks the part, right? It's there. You can just see it with him, even with all the concerns people have about Alabama interior offensive linemen. I think he's different. And I think he would be someone that would absolutely excel in any type of offense. But I really think that zone blocking is something that really suits him in his experience with a mobile quarterback. Kind of, you're forced to learn some of those things. And so I think he definitely has that. Gray Zabel is just the Swiss Army knife, honestly. I think he's a guy that can play. Probably not going to be a left tackle, but the value of someone that can play left guard really well, center really well, right guard really well, right tackle in an absolute pinch for a game or two. That is so valuable that he's probably going to go in the top 25 because of that. And he's a winner. At North Dakota State, despite the FCS stuff, the dude's an absolute winner, and there is a track record of a lot of NDSU guys, including offensive linemen, coming into the NFL and performing really well. Tate Ratledge, unbelievable combine. Probably shot himself up a full round and a half with what he did, and he looks the part. He looks healthy. The face of the offensive line of one of the best college football runs we've seen in a while at Georgia. A couple of plays go here and there in the last 2 years. We might be looking at a 3 or 4 time, defending national champion at Georgia and stuff. And so a lot of guys, Donovan Jackson, like I already talked about, steady Eddie. I think you can put him in and have him play left tackle and he would do fine. I think you can have him come in and play left guard and he'll be one of the 5 best left guards in the NFL right away.
Well, when you talk about Donovan Jackson, like we know how much the Seahawks value grit, right? We heard that word a lot under Pete Carroll. It's certainly a concept that John Schneider is going to carry forward. There's certain players that they grade higher because they just love ball, right? They're committed to it. You don't have to worry about them screwing things up off the field, but are also, you know, smart, tough, dependable. We hear that sort of mission statement all the time. And you talk about a guy like Jackson who pulled up lame at one point on one drill. The guys were talking about it, Jeremiah and Eisen in the booth, you know, and then you even saw a trainer attending to him and wrapping what looked like either his quad or his hamstring. And so, you know, I thought, oh, his day's done. You know, there were a couple of guys that tweaked something early on or in the 40 and checked out. But he was right back out there running the drills that, you know, aren't all that friendly on your hamstring. Something like that had to catch the eye of the Seahawks front office. Another guy that would check that box as well. Did you see Gunnar Helm's ankle?
That was rough.
Yeah.
What a gamer. What a gamer, man.
Yeah, because I thought he was having a terrible day. When I saw him run the 40, I thought that's not the guy I've seen on tape. Like that, he was one of my favorite tight end prospects coming into the day, and he was lumbering. He looked terrible. And then you come to find out later that he had one of those sprained ankles that I think we've all experienced it, where the blood drains to the bottom and it just looks like he got hit by a car, but he tested everything the rest of the day despite that. Stuff like that gets you noticed at VMAC.
Yeah, 100%. I think you nailed it. John Schneider eats that stuff up. He wants gamers. He wants dudes that are just absolute live and breathe football and want to get better. And I think like that speaks a lot to that Ohio State team. It didn't work out in one way. They all came back because they wanted to right the wrong of beating Michigan. And that didn't work out, but I definitely respect and love that hey, that game meant like that football game means more to them right now than going to the NFL. And it didn't work. And then on top of that, they responded again. Like, and again, I'm not an Ohio State fan, but it just, yeah, we're just gonna win the national title and stuff. And yeah, which you heard the Michigan fans at the combine. That was a very unique situation and stuff at the quarterback drills. But it just, those are the types of guys that I think not just John, but Mike McDonald loves. Like if as a defensive coach, you like offensive dudes that are going to push through adversity, whether it's mental or physical, and still fight. Like that's just a very defensive coach mindset historically. So I think it's not just John, it's John and Mike. They're going to eat that up. And I definitely think those are guys that may get picked at 18, Donovan Jackson. A Gunnar Helm may get picked at 50. And I wouldn't be surprised, honestly.
Yeah. Let's talk about skill positions, because I think that's one area that's not getting a lot of attention in Seattle. There's this perception that, you know, assuming they hold on to DK Metcalf, that with DK and JSN and potentially Noah Fant, even if it's on a restructured deal, AJ Barner, and then that running back room, that's really not something that needs a lot of attention in this draft, because we got to focus on the trenches, right? Well, I've been telling people for quite a while now that, first of all, the roster is going to look different at the end of April than it does today. And I think they're going to address some of this trench stuff in free agency in a way that we won't feel as desperate heading into the draft. But skill position is in need. I mean, Clint Kubiak loves to run 12 and 13 personnel. So maybe you don't need as deep of a wide receiver room, but you probably have to add to the tight end position. But Tyler Lockett's not going to be on this roster. We're probably on a day-to-day watch this week, as they need to make some maneuvers to get under the salary cap before next week. You know, we know JSN and DK are going to be there, presumably. And then after that, it kind of falls off. While this class doesn't have the cachet of the last couple of years, where we just, you know, some historically good wide receiver drafts, not just at the top with blue chip talent, but also deep and layered throughout. But it's one that the more I look at it, what I saw in Mobile, what we saw on the field, tons of guys, I have the numbers here somewhere of all the guys that ran 4.3s. And it looks better the longer and harder you look at the group, doesn't it? You agree?
Yeah. And again, I think that is, again, another like coming to Jesus moment about this draft. The more you look at it, the more solid it is, especially at the wide receiver spot. I think the wide receiver spot was one of the most highest. That and the quarterbacks was the two things that got knocked the most on this class. And the more you look at it, and this happens with every draft, the more you spend time analyzing these people, the more you fall in love with them, or the more you hate certain other ones. But this is just another man, I can get a couple good number 2 wide receivers in this draft. You need good number 2 wide receivers to make the playoffs and go far in the playoffs. And this draft is full of these kind of guys. I think there's, however you want to describe Travis Hunter, I think he's going to be a cornerback in the NFL that's going to get 20 to 25 packages. Depends on who drafts him and what they let him do. But I really do think Matthew Golden has become that guy that can be that number 1 receiver. I think a Luther Burden, McMillan can be great number 2s. Like when I say great number 2s, think of like a Devontae Smith type of impact number 2 wide receiver. Whereas maybe on some not great teams, he's a number 1, but on a really great team, he can be an awesome number 2 that helps you win a Super Bowl. Restrepo out of Miami. I think you were the one that's kind of been on him as a Golden Tate guy. Man, it is, you see it right there. Just Golden Tate is one of the harder wide receivers to describe, especially the Seahawks years. Like he was that guy that just always did the little things, would definitely have gotten a few personal flags for his blocks that he would do for our running backs and guys and for Russell Wilson. But then out of nowhere, he's going to have a 75-yard touchdown. And he's going to let you hear about it the whole way to the end zone and stuff. But he's just one of those guys that just keeping him in the game, keep an eye on him, because the moment you don't, he's going to burn you for a touchdown and flip the game. That's definitely one of those receivers I really like. Emeka Egbuka is one of those interesting guys where he could go 20, he could go 40. And if he's just another interesting guy that if Jeremiah Smith, the best wide receiver prospect I've ever seen, isn't on his team, what kind of season does he put together? Does he put the kind of season together that makes him a top 15 pick just because of what he was able to do in that offense? Just a lot of those guys, again, you want that 12 personnel, so the tight ends are going to be a big part of it. You still need that number 3 wide receiver. I think that's something Seattle has kind of, it seems as JSN ascended, Lockett really has kind of hit that final stage of his career. And I'm really excited to see what Kubiak can do, because everyone's like, oh, well, it's Kubiak, it's the Shanahan scheme, we just need 2 receivers. No, you need that 3rd receiver, and I definitely think you can get one like a Jalen Royals. You and I have gushed about him for a long time. There's guys at pick 50 and pick 82 that can come in and be a big impact on your team. And same with the tight ends. There's a ton of tight ends. Mason Taylor, Gunnar Helm. Those are guys on day 2 that we might look back and be like, oh, that's a top 6 tight end in the NFL. And we compare him with Barner, which a lot of people forget. In that Monday Night Football game against the Lions, Mike McDonald was interviewed by Aikman and Joe Buck, and he said, Barner is going to be a superstar. Like, that was a literal quote. And then I think in that game, he ended up having a nice start. And he's just that guy that I think is going to make a big year 2 jump, especially in the Kubiak scheme. And so you cannot leave this draft, in my opinion, without finding a potential wide receiver and a potential tight end that you don't have to take at pick 18. You can get round 3, round 2, round 4, round 5, that I think over the length of that contract, you're going to feel really good about.
And as I think about what type of receiver out of this draft class might be best to pair with JSN and DK that would complement them the most, you can make an argument for a taller, longer guy that can run a complete route tree, a guy like Jaden Wiggins. But I keep kind of going back to what, I mean, everyone that runs that kind of offense always seems to have, or is always looking for sort of that toy, right? Like Deebo Samuel was obviously just traded, was that guy for Kyle Shanahan for many years, a guy that could run out of the backfield, could play inside, outside. You could really do some cool things with them, jet sweeps and the like. You know, McVay seems like he's always been looking for that guy and just hasn't really found him. But Rashid Shaheed was that dude last year before the knee injury for Kubiak, and he got great production out of him before he was injured. It seems like there are guys, you've already mentioned Restrepo in this draft, but one that really stood out to me from Indianapolis, even more so, I thought he kind of flew under the radar in Mobile, was Jalen Noel from Iowa State.
Yeah. Who would have thought Iowa State would have 2 wide receivers that look like they might go on day 2 or early day 3.
I can't even name their quarterback.
Yeah, exactly. You know, that's, maybe if we had known that, we would have taken Brock Purdy earlier or something than Mr. Irrelevant and stuff. But yeah, just him along with some other guys. His name escapes me, the Arkansas guy who's just been an absolute
Isaac Tesla. Yeah.
Oh my, like just these guys, they're really showing out. I really like them. You need that toy. I think the one guy, not to go negative, but I think one guy a lot of people were thinking of that type of toy was Tez Johnson. And the combine was rough. And I thought the combine was also rough for Troy Franklin last year. And that's really, when I think of Oregon, that's that kind of weapon they have almost every single year. And I feel like those guys always struggle at the combine. And Troy Franklin had a brutal preseason. And then by the end of the year, he started to look like someone that might have a future. I think Tez Johnson might be in that same spot. I think it's really tough at that size when your speed showed what it was at the combine. I want to see his 40 time at Oregon. I think he's going to take a full digit off, maybe a digit and a half. Like the player I saw that absolutely that he was the best player on the field in that Big Ten championship game. That's Oregon versus Penn State. There's a lot of NFL players. There's a lot of first round picks or top 50 picks that were in that game, and he looked like Tyreek Hill. So that's a guy that was a loser that just maybe falls in the right spot where it makes sense to take a shot on him for Seattle as someone to take a look at, because he is the kind of guy that would make me think a little bit of a Rashid Shaheed or a Marquez Valdez-Scantling type of guy that had a good year under Kubiak, if Kubiak doesn't even bring him to Seattle. And so, like you said, there's a few of those guys that I really think is that perfect complement number 3, because I don't really know if Bobo is that for what Kubiak is looking for. Bobo is going to be in there for those run plays and maybe a couple goal line things, but he's also at that point where at this point in his career, we kind of would have hoped he would have made an impact more so, where I think a new OC, it makes sense he's going to bring in a toy.
I'd say as much as he wants to run 13 personnel, put 15 pounds on him and kind of have him be a move tight end almost, I mean, that's sort of his skill set anyway. Right.
Absolutely. That makes sense.
Yeah, what you were talking about with Tez Johnson, it tracks. Like, he's still going to get an opportunity because he's just so sudden in his short area movement. Saw it in Mobile, he was almost uncoverable, especially in the one-on-ones. But man, you look at that body, 154 pounds. The calves are as big around as my thumb, I think. And then he runs, the straight line speed not there. Now, he did well in the short shuttle and the 3-cone, which you would expect, but it's really hard for me to get over that frame. Whereas the flip side of that, right? Jalen Noel is about the same height, and yet he packs 194 pounds on that. He's rocked up 4.39 in the 40, 1.5, 110-yard split, 41.5-inch vertical, 11.2 broad jump, sub-7 3-cone, and a 4.17 20-yard shuttle. And oh, by the way, he bench pressed 225 pounds more times than Kenneth Grant did. Put up 23 reps. Just a really great athletic performance for a guy that was productive too, with a quarterback we can't think of.
Yeah, no, exactly. I was going to say, like, Big Ten wide receivers, it is a game of roulette when you draft them. For every great one, there's a Jalen Reagor, right? Ask Philadelphia if they would like to have Jalen Reagor or Justin Jefferson right now, right? And so, however, this isn't Texas Tech. This isn't the old Oklahoma years where everyone was getting rich. This is Iowa State. This is, Campbell, ground and pound, ball control, a little bit more modern. But like when you succeed it's like if a wide receiver dominates out of Kansas State. It's like, well, man, that's saying something, because that means that program changed their philosophy and what they do because they knew what they had. And I think, like you said, I think Noel is definitely that kind of guy.
Before we get into this draft, I asked you to put a full 7-round mock, no trades, just 8 picks for the Seahawks, kind of based on everything you've seen in the draft process up until this point. Going into it, what was your philosophy? Kind of what was your plan heading into it? And giving a little something away here, looking at the top of your draft, did you operate under the assumption that Ernest Jones will be back?
I did operate under the assumption that Ernest Jones will be back. At pick 18, I have about 5 or 6 guys that I'm not trading back for. And I didn't want to do any trades in this mock. I just wanted to stick and pick. There's about 5 or 6 guys that if they're there, you race the card up, right? And one of those guys that I have that maybe not everybody else has right now, but I think by draft time, and we saw some reports this week, was my number 1 pick, that I think if he is there at 18, it'll be very hard for Seattle not to select this certain player, which I don't know if you want me to release him now, but Jihad Campbell is like we talked about Gray Zabel as a Swiss Army knife on the offensive line. I think that Jihad Campbell out of Alabama is a Swiss Army knife that I cannot think of a more perfect type of weapon or player that you can get in this draft for what Mike Macdonald likes to do. Mike Macdonald loves to have a quartet of edge rushers, which is awesome. He also values and understands the potential of and he gets the best out of our linebackers. So what better than to select a player that was coached by Nick Saban for the last couple years before Kalen DeBoer, and then also does both of those things for Mike Macdonald on this team. And I'm going to hear some people, and you've heard this before from me. You don't take linebackers in the first round. It's bad business, right? But I don't view Jihad Campbell as a linebacker. I view him as a guy that can play linebacker, a guy that can play edge, a guy that you can send on some of those Jamal Adams blitzes that we saw in 2020 that the quarterback had absolutely no time and just had to immediately, drop back and get rid of it immediately. This guy tackles, drops in coverage, does really well in coverage, gets after the quarterback, stuffs the stat sheets. And I think at pick 18, if you're looking for any last guys that might slip, that has that potential to be a blue chip, I think Campbell has that. And another reason why I like Campbell here, and there are reports that are saying that he probably doesn't get out of the top 20. So this is right at that end of that range where I think it makes a lot of sense to take him. This is a testament to how deep the offensive line is in this draft, right? Gray Zabel is a guy I'd be more than happy to take at 18. I run the card up if Membo or Booker are there, right? I'd probably take both of those guys before Jihad Campbell. In this mock, neither of them were there. I don't think either of them will be there on draft day. But I do think Jihad Campbell, this is that first spot where it makes some sense. And I think as more people come around on him and we learn more about him and everything that his tape shows, which is an absolute star, I think this is probably a little bit too optimistic, but there are shades of what Micah Parsons does in Dallas.
Yeah.
But with a better linebacker. Micah is a better edge. Jihad is a much better linebacker, and I think Jihad has the potential to get in the same zip code as an edge rusher that Micah Parsons did. Helps that they're the same number. You just see it. When he gets on those plays where he gets after the quarterback or blows up a run play because he's blitzing, it's that, oh my goodness, that player looks different than everybody else on the field. And that's what Micah Parsons does. And that's what I see with Jihad Campbell is that's that ceiling. Can he be a Micah Parsons that plays some linebacker?
Yeah, there was a moment about a month ago when I looked into it where if you looked up his height and weight specs versus Micah Parsons coming out of the combine, they were identical. You could really make that sort of physical comp. And people forget that Micah Parsons played off-ball linebacker. And then, it was Dan Quinn who decided to move him full-time to the edge. And where he really came onto my radar was I obviously knew who he was. I just didn't think he'd be a fit. And then within about a 2-day range, at sort of the beginning of mock draft season, Matt Miller and I think it was Chad Reeder from NFL.com did their first round mocks, and they both had Campbell going to the Seahawks. And I thought, wait a minute, are they assuming that Jones won't be resigned? But it's because some scouts think that he could be more productive as a full-time edge, that he's that explosive getting to the quarterback. And that's what excites me. I think he can, with the way Mike Macdonald's brain works and how he likes versatility. Ernest Jones, Jihad Campbell, and Tyrese Knight could all coexist playing at the same time because Campbell can help you off the edge. I think even Tyrese Knight, and they did a little bit with him last year because of his frame and his ability to get to the quarterback, that he can come up on the edge a little bit too, which just presents all sorts of issues for the defense. This would fit squarely into the bucket of best player available, best talent, guy that has the best chance to have the best career at 18, no matter what, right?
Yeah, and I think we saw Mike Macdonald take Baltimore to historic levels for 2 years once he got his chess piece, which was Roquan Smith. And I think at the trade deadline, a lot of people are like, oh, Ernest Jones, that's his chess piece. I love Ernest Jones, right? He's going to be a big part of Seattle's future and a lot of hopeful division titles and playoff wins over the next few years. I don't think he's the chess piece that a Roquan Smith is. I do think he helped the defense. I think Jihad Campbell is that. It's just that piece on the board that completely changes and tilts the field your way. It is that blue chip guy. And like you said, he got 5 sacks this year, and that was either blitzing. It's not him, hand on the ground as an edge rusher. And so if you let him do that a little bit more, let's say he does that 70-30 or 60-40 compared to his linebacker stuff, you add him focused on that. This is a guy that can get, I don't think, just 10 sacks. I don't think he's in that Derek Hall, Boy Mafe range. This is a guy I think is, like I said, in that Micah range, where I think 14, 15, 16 sacks is kind of that ceiling that we can see from him, while dropping into coverage and being a productive player. Like, there's just not a whole lot of guys that can do both of those. And again, there's some really good players that are going to be here at this round, I think, or at pick 18, that I'm interested as well. I just think getting your defensive head coach his true, hey, for the next 4 years, you are going to be the destroyer of worlds for opposing offenses. I think Jahad Campbell, we would look back and be like, yep, that's a top 6 to 10 best defensive player in the NFL. I think that is his potential.
And then, as I often do when I'm doing these mock drafts, if I go any position other than offensive line in the first round, I'm almost always going front 7 or front, well, whatever you want to call it, right? Defensive line. And I include edge the way that Mike Macdonald uses his edges in that group. It's such a good group. Daniel Jeremiah says he has 27 starter grades among defensive tackles. I think in this one, double what he usually has. And the edge group is just as deep and dynamic. That seems to be where the value is at 18, because I know I can turn around and I can get a guy like Tate Ratledge, who you've talked quite a bit about already, at 50, because there's a clump of guys in that range that would make a lot of sense and are perfect zone fits. And as much as Mike Macdonald talked behind the podium in Indianapolis about how they like the guys they have, and they still see a future for Christian Haynes, and they think that some of these guys like Tao Lamea even would fit really well in a wide zone scheme, and that they'll have opportunities to get a plug and play guy out of this draft to stick at one of the guard spots, in addition to what I believe is going to be a veteran free agent that'll also make people happy, right? Ratledge just makes a ton of sense because he just looks like he was born to play in that zone offense.
Absolutely. If you weren't running a zone offense, I would still be very excited about Ratledge at 50. But with us running the Kubiak scheme, I can't think that there's a more perfect marriage of a guy that's a champion. He's experienced. He's healthy now. I don't think his injuries were anything that makes me feel like it's going to be hard for him to stay on the field over the next 4 years. I think there were more freak things. I think he's a guy that immediately, we talked about this last year, Christian Haynes was probably always going to be a little bit of a project, even though he was more disappointing than we thought this year. That won't be a conversation with Ratledge. Ratledge comes in and is a starter immediately. The job is his. He does and then I think within a year or two, this is a guy that's like the captain of your offensive line. Now, if we have Drew Dahlman as our center, now we got 2 captains probably on that offensive line, which, I mean, that's honestly just that potential of that future of a cross Ratledge, Dahlman, and Abe Lucas being healthy. Like, I think we're talking about a dynamic change on the offensive line that we haven't seen since the Super Bowl years. But whether you get Dahlman or not, Ratledge comes in and he helps make your offensive line demonstrably better. And I think it's another guy that you plug in on the left side, you can plug in on the right side. I believe he even did some center snaps at the combine. Like, this is one of those guys that
he stayed after and did some of those center reps.
Yeah. It's again, just that value of being able to play those 3 positions in the SEC, dominating, being an All-American, being a champion. I can't think of a better guy at pick 50 to really change that culture that Mike Macdonald wants.
Played almost exclusively right guard at Georgia, although he does have 4 snaps at left guard for the Bulldogs. But full-time starter for the last 3 years, over 37 games played, about 1,200 pass block snaps. And this is what really excites me too, because we've drafted interior offensive linemen that have upside as maulers, right? We saw that with Anthony Bradford and some of the other guys they've taken. But the pass protection hasn't been there, and that's where it affects the passing game. Obviously, 1,200 pass block snaps, 2 sacks allowed in his career at Georgia, only 1 over the last 2 seasons, only 6 quarterback hits in 1,200 pass reps. It's hard not to get excited about a guy with a mullet like that can also pass protect. Like I just, yeah.
Love the character. And again, I'm not trying to discriminate against the smaller schools, but there really is something of just, hey, let's get the best offensive lineman out of Georgia.
Yeah.
Right? Where they believe in ground and pound. Like I said, he's played in he was part of 2 national championship teams. He started on that team that destroyed TCU in the national championship. If he doesn't get hurt last year, Georgia, might have beat Notre Dame, and the whole scenario of his vibe changes, and he's probably honestly a borderline first round pick if he stayed healthy last year.
Yeah. And then we take a quarterback in the 3rd round. And this, as I continue to do mock drafts, and I'm adamant about, we got to start dipping into these quarterback classes until we find a guy that sticks, and just taking shots on guys. Quinn Ewers did an episode on it last week. The connections to John Schneider and the Seahawks are hard to ignore, and they seem to grow every day. I thought he really helped himself by getting himself ready for the combine, recovering from the injuries, which were significant, and having what I thought was a really good throwing session. Apparently he interviewed really well too. To me, when I do these mocks, this seems like the sweet spot. Now you can talk me into a quarterback at 18 if it's the right guy, because I like the vision. I like the idea there. But to me, the 3rd round is kind of the sweet spot. And I feel like some of these guys are sort of bunched up there. Why'd you go Ewers instead of maybe a Kyle McCord, Will Howard, Jalen Milroe, sort of that 2nd or 3rd tier?
Yeah. When I do mocks or when I'm scouting for the draft, I draft, if I'm a general manager, for the highest potential. What is the ceiling of this player? And if I believe in my culture, if I believe in my program, if I believe in my coaching staff, then I'm going to take the guy that has the higher ceiling if I'm trying to get to the next level, which I believe the Seahawks are in that perfect spot where they're trying to get to the next level as a team, a division winner, winning playoff games, winning home playoff games, competing in NFC championships. And so I want a guy that can potentially get us a higher ceiling than maybe a safer pick. And I think Quinn Ewers arguably has the highest ceiling of all the quarterbacks in this draft, probably other than Cam Ward. I really do. One of the highest rated recruits out of all time, went to Ohio State, ran into just an incredible string of quarterbacks that he knew, I'm not getting on the field, so I'm going to go to Texas. I don't love the fit of him at Texas with Steve Sarkisian. I know you've heard me complain a lot about Sarkisian's
really
offense.
Good at throwing screens. Really good.
Oh my gosh. My favorite play is on 3rd down when you tell your quarterback to turn his back to the offensive line. I think that's a real smart play to run a few times. But my Sarkisian hate aside, I think Quinn Ewers, again, his age, and this is a guy that's played in 4 playoff games. This is a guy that played at probably the 2nd most difficult program in the country to play at other than Ohio State, and arguably might be more difficult to play at than Ohio State because Texas hasn't really been back, and he got them back. He really did. A Big 12 champion, got them to the SEC championship, probably a game they should have won, was within a couple plays of maybe upsetting that Ohio State team that they probably had no business being in the game with. And I thought he played really well until that final few plays there at the red zone against Ohio State. It's finally coming out. He was not healthy this year, right? The guy that we saw last year that ran around UW in that Sugar Bowl loss, like ran past some NFL guys. We did not see that this year. His ankle was bad. And as Daniel Jeremiah and other people have finally reported, he had a full oblique tear. That is not a common injury that you see in the NFL. That is a pitcher's injury. That is an MLB player's injury. And those guys are out a long time.
Yeah.
So he's hurt.
2 months if you're a hitter in Major League. Yeah.
Yeah. It was Final Four or bust. It's Texas. It's you have to deliver as the quarterback of Texas. And the most heralded, popular prospect in the history of college football is looking over your shoulder, and every home game, 90,000 fans are screaming his name, not yours. And what does he do? Wins a conference championship, wins, 24 games in the last 2 years. And like I said, gets to the Final Four twice, gets Texas back, and he held all that up. And you've brought this up before. Schneider looks for guys that tilt the room. And Quinn Ewers is the definition of that. Will Howard is the definition of that. But I think Quinn Ewers, if healthy, and I think he's only going to get more healthy, and I think this is a perfect spot for Quinn Ewers to go to. Gets to go leave Texas and gets to go up to the Pacific Northwest where nobody pays attention to him. He would get to sit behind Geno Smith for a year, get fully healthy. This is a guy that probably needs a full 6 to 12 months to just heal, mentally heal from everything he had to hold off at Texas, physically heal, get that ankle right, get that oblique right, learn from Kubiak. And I don't think that there is a more perfect fit. And that's another nice thing about this draft. Dart, a perfect fit for the Shanahan scheme, the Kubiak scheme. Will Howard, I think, is a perfect fit for what Kubiak is trying to do. Even to an extent, I think Shedeur Sanders would be a fantastic fit for what McVay and Shanahan and Kubiak are trying to do. Quinn Ewers, I think, has the ceiling that he can be one of the best Shanahan, Kubiak, McVay quarterbacks that we have seen. And I know he's very polarizing and the tape doesn't look good, but if you were playing on one ankle and half of your side is torn and you're playing against the best teams in college football in the SEC and you're playing these playoff games, I think there's a few enough plays where you can see when he's healthy, that is a franchise quarterback. Really quick, after that Michigan game, he was projected by, I believe it was the 33rd team, as going like number 4 or 5 overall to Carolina.
Yeah.
Like that Michigan tape, watch him, because that is the game where he tore his oblique.
That was his
in the
last
first
game.
3. Yes,
Yeah.
and that was the best quarterback in college football this year was him in that game against Grant and Graham at the Big House before we kind of knew this wasn't the same Michigan team that we had seen the last few years.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think the thing that he's one of those guys that he does have his detractors. He's very polarizing, as you mentioned. If you wanted to put a cut up together of his bad plays, you could make him look really bad. If you want to put a cut up together of his good plays, he looks like the first pick in the draft. Maybe more than any of the prospects in this class, you can do that with him. But I would argue you can do that with any college quarterback too, because they're developing, right? They're not going to be a finished product. The thing that I think puts it over the top for me is, and you touched on it, like no one would have blamed this guy if he had transferred prior to last year, right? But yet, not only did he choose not to do that when Arch Manning was ready to go, and certainly Quinn Ewers could have made some money in the transfer portal, but that Texas didn't force him out the door, didn't want him to leave, even though they had Arch Manning still there, one of the most heralded prospects, as you've said, in a very, very long time, and a guy that everyone is just anointed as the number 1 overall pick anymore. That's some of the stuff that happens behind the scenes in college football nowadays that I don't think gets publicized, is players get nudged out the door. Right? Like I questioned Jalen Milroe coming out maybe too soon, could have benefited from one more year. I don't know that Alabama wanted him back. I think that might be one example of that, but there are certainly others. And the fact that tells me what Texas thought of Quinn Ewers, what Steve Sarkisian thought of Quinn Ewers, that he wanted him back, even though Arch Manning was waiting in the wings. So that tells me a lot. We address offensive line again in the 4th round, and this is a guy I really can't wait to hear your take on. Someone that I haven't he's on my list to watch more tape of, but it seems like among Seahawk fans that like to do mock drafts, he sort of is getting some buzz. He looked a little bit more athletic than the typical Wisconsin tackle coming out. What'd you see from him, and why would you see him as a fit on this roster for a team that just took a young tackle in last year's draft?
Yeah, I think Jack Nelson is a perfect example of a guy that is a tackle, which there's quite a few of these guys in the draft this year that's going to be a better guard than a tackle. But in a pinch can play right tackle. And I really think that is where Jack is best suited, is, again, as a right guard that can play right tackle in a pinch. I think Seattle's moving on from some of the guys on the offensive line, and so that makes a lot of sense. I have been raised with the belief, when in doubt, take Wisconsin or Iowa offensive linemen and everything will be okay. And there's a few of those guys in this draft. And like you said, Jack is not your prototypical, not saying he's not a mauler, but he's not the mid-2000s, late 90s, early 2000s offensive lineman from Wisconsin. He's a little bit more mobile, and that's, their culture. They're changing with their coaching staff and kind of going a little bit more of a zone read scheme, which that excites me as well over there at Wisconsin. Not a great year at Wisconsin. But I think his tape shows me someone that is going to push your interior offensive lineman, that He is a 4th-round guy that I personally think can come in, and by September or October, we might be looking at as a better fit for what we're trying to do under the Kubiak scheme than maybe a Lumea, or might be a guy that pushes a Christian Haynes, who I know really excelled in zone blocking at UConn. But this is just adding another body to the pile that is not it's close to the end of the 4th round, but it's not like those 5th, 6th, 7th round guys. It's just another guy that I think in those first 4 picks that we're just throwing to that interior offensive lineman or the offensive line because we're trying to fix the problem. And again, I also think the versatility that a Tate Ratledge and a Jack Nelson provide, this offense can withstand injuries. Like, it's going to suck if Charles Cross gets hurt and misses time, but we saw what happened to Seattle over the years when Abe Lucas can't play. A Tate Ratledge and a Jack Nelson, these are the type of guys you bring in to offset when those types of things happen, and you can still be a top 15 to top 18 offense, which is all Seattle needed this year, and they would have been, probably sitting there hosting a playoff game.
Much different athletic profile than Michael Jarrell from last year. I like his length, 6'7", 314, 33.5-inch arms. He athleticism score was 12th out of the tackles that were at the combine. That's pretty solid considering the group. When I look at tackles nowadays, more than ever, I want versatility in a guy. 4-year starter at Wisconsin. I think he played almost exclusively right tackle. Am I right?
Yep.
Does his skill set lead you to believe at all that he could play left tackle if he needed to? He could be a swing guy.
Yeah, I think we've seen a few of these swing guys that we've taken late in the draft that just haven't quite lived up to it. And I think asking a George Fant to come back and be that kind of guy in a pinch is just, you're asking for trouble, right? And like I said, we saw it with Abe Lucas when he got hurt. I don't want to see Charles Cross get hurt. We've also been very fortunate. And so I do think that although he's been a right tackle, if you told me, hey, for one game, or for a game and a half, can Jack play left tackle? Yes. Anything more than that, just like all these guys that are probably better suited for different spots, you're going to get more exposed. But I don't think it's like oh my gosh, we have to run everything to the right and we can do nothing to the left and we have to shut that half of the field off. Jack is a better fit to be able to do that than maybe some of the other guys we have drafted under the Pete Carroll era, hoping that they could be a swing tackle.
Now, this tight end class has gotten a lot of buzz over the last couple of months. One analyst called it the best overall since 2010. We didn't see the top guys work out at the combine, but we saw some of the depth, right? And I'm really intrigued by your pick here because Evans is one of those guys that, full-time starter the last 2 years, but played, parts of all of his 4 years at Notre Dame. But because of the way the offense is executed there at Notre Dame, not the most productive guy, 77 catches, 900 yards, 5 touchdowns in his career, but went out at the combine and I thought looked like of the guys that were there, some of them look like strictly pass catchers. Some of them like Jackson Hawes, guys that really excel as blockers, but have some work to do and may not give you a whole lot of juice in the passing game. Evans looks like one of those guys athletic enough to be able to do both.
Yeah, I think he is a product of where he went to school and how it kind of will affect his draft stock, which might benefit a team like Seattle. You put him on a team with a scheme that really focuses on the tight end. And I like Riley Leonard, and I thought he had a great weekend at the combine and he looks a lot better. I thought he had a good Senior Bowl. I think this is a guy that might be on Seattle's radar as well. And I know that when in doubt, he did look to Mitchell Evans when he wasn't using his legs. It's just one of those things where, this is a compliment. Riley Leonard looks a lot like the best of Tim Tebow at the NFL level. I think he's going to be a better thrower than Tim Tebow was, obviously, and stuff. But just that type of style, that intangibles, that athletic ability to really move the chains. I think Marcus Freeman's a fantastic coach at Notre Dame, but I think he knew what he had. He had a top 3 defense in college football. And if he controlled the clock and kept, Riley Leonard running for first downs and then taking the random shots down the field, and look at that, got them all the way to, within striking distance of Ohio State late in that game for the national championship. Yeah. And Mitchell Evans is your chain moving tight end. That is an excellent run blocker, that he is a red zone type of guy that just didn't get a lot of the feeds because everything at the Notre Dame red zone was draws and sweeps and counters by Riley Leonard. So he just was a product of Riley Leonard being the face of that offense and Riley was asked to run a lot more than he was to throw. Mitchell strikes me as a perfect number 2 tight end in the NFL and a really solid guy if you're going to run 12 personnel as much as Clint Kubiak ran last year. Terrible offense with health reasons at New Orleans. That's what we're hoping is the reason why the offense struggled last year. I think that is why they still ran 12 personnel, 7th most in the NFL. The other teams above them, those four of those teams were the teams that played in the conference championships this year. So there is a lot to successfully running 12 personnel that leads to success. And so I think relying on Noah Fant frustrates me, to be honest. I want another ground and pound type of tight end that's going to move the chains, because I want to see what Barner can actually do if we kind of let him off the leash a little bit. And I think Mitchell Evans provides that opportunity for Seattle.
6'5", 258. 4.7, 4.40, 1.55, 10-yard split, good jumps. His 3-cone, 20-yard shuttle were solid. And this intrigues me too, right? For a new play caller that likes to use some fullback. I want to ask you this because I'm looking at his stats, and I noticed that he has 8 carries for 13 yards and a touchdown as a rusher. Did you, when you were watching any of his stuff, did you happen to stumble upon any of those reps? Were those like fullback type reps? Were they using him in that manner?
I know one of them, I believe, was in the I want to say it was not the SMU game. Who they played in the first round? Indiana, I believe. It was either Indiana or it was in the second round game against Georgia. He ran a counter. I think it was the Georgia game because Marcus Freeman and that team cooked up a few counters that just caught Georgia off off their on their heels and stuff. And is he that fullback guy? Maybe. Would I prefer to see Barner actually do that a couple times? Yeah, but you're not going to have your number 1 tight end do that a lot. This is that guy, like that Notre Dame, Midwest, put me in, coach. I'm going to clear out the linebackers for you. But hey, like you said, that 4.72, that's not nothing for your number 2 tight end, right? Yeah. This isn't Pharaoh Brown, Pharaoh Stonehands Brown out there that, was struggling to look like he could even move around. This is a guy that can come, like you said, when in a pinch, he can run the ball a couple times. You can run a sweep for him. You can run a fullback dive for him. He's got some athleticism. It's just with such a unique offense in South Bend that they just really didn't need to use him a lot. Whereas if he was probably on an 8-3 team, he probably has a lot more carries and a lot more catches and a lot more touchdowns. It's just that ball control style really shrunk the game.
Went to try and find Barner's combine numbers to compare him to, but forgot he was injured through the process of the foot, I think, and wasn't able to test last year. 6th round, I always know when I ask you to do a mock draft for me that you're going to throw some names at me that I'm not familiar with yet and need to go run and look at. The 2 6th round picks, Isis Waxter, corner out of Villanova, Patrick Jenkins, defensive tackle, Tulane. Tell me about those two.
Yeah, Ice Waxter is what he goes by. A big corner, 6. I think he's almost 6'1". I have to double check what his size was, and then I believe, a big corner. You even said it yourself. Is he a safety? Is he a guy that's going to transfer to safety? I think that's definitely a potential option for him. He did not test well at the combine. I think his tape looks really good for his level. All the scouting stuff that I've been able to find says if you're running some zone offense or zone defense, this guy can fit in that. This is not a guy that's probably going to be running man defense a ton. So if you're going to be running man defense here in Seattle, then this is a guy that could translate into being a safety. We know the Rayshawn Jenkins news. He's probably not going to be a Seahawk here in the next couple of days. And so I really like Julian Love. I really like Kobe Bryant. I think Kobe's found his spot. I think he's earned the right to have another year as a starter. Even with some really interesting defensive backs and safeties in this draft class that might be there at 18. I think that getting a guy like Ice and having him learn behind Julian Love and Kobe Bryant, some veterans that you have on this roster, I think is a really interesting developmental prospect that could also play some corner in a pinch.
And then Jenkins looks like a smaller defensive tackle, 6'1", under 300 pounds. Tell me how you think he'd fit in with Byron Murphy, Leo Williams, the guys we have up front now.
Yeah, a little undersized. I don't think he necessarily fits exactly what Mike Macdonald is looking for, but the energy and effort, I think he was arguably the best defensive tackle in the American Athletic Conference this year on a very good Tulane team that probably was in the hunt for a shot if this wasn't Boise State's, special season. I think Tulane had a great shot to potentially get to the college football playoff. And I would have loved to have seen him in that first round game against, the likes of a Texas or Penn State and stuff. But just a guy, his motor is the kind of motor you want to have there in August at training camp. His energy and effort, his leadership, that everything that sounds like it's off the charts over at Tulane, which is a really strong program, has put out some, really solid players, no superstars, but some solid players. And I think he was a really strong part of a team that I believe won 10 games this year, 10 or 11 games for Tulane, that, get him in there for 3 or 4 snaps a game this first year, see what you can build his body up to. But I think he's that guy that allows you to get better in practice, which, not everybody talks about, but you need those types of guys that elevate the roster in training camp, in preseason, in during the season as you go along, and you're trying to keep guys healthy and you're still trying to get positive reps. This is one of those guys, just like Ice Waxter. Let's get him. Let's kind of redshirt him for a year. Let's see what we can build him out to be and find out what he's best suited for. And let's see if we can get a decent player out of him over in 2026, 2027.
And then we keep hearing about how great this running back class is, and it certainly, looked like it at the combine. I found those numbers that I told you I had earlier, going back to the wide receivers for a moment. 25 receivers on Saturday ran 4.48 or better in the 40, 10 in the 4.3s. But the running back class, 13 of them at 4.48 or better, 3 of them in the 4.3s. And this is not a running back class made up of scat backs, like a lot of 210, 220-pound dudes in this class. Donovan Edwards is a guy that a couple of years ago was probably thought of as a first-round pick. Looking back at his sophomore year at Michigan, almost 1,000 yards rushing. He averaged 7 yards a carry in that combo backfield with Blake Corum. It was a really, really dynamic, had 9 touchdowns on the season. And then it feels like the shine has worn off of him. He's barely run for 1,000 yards in the last 2 years combined. And it kind of even felt in Mobile like he was sort of lost in the shuffle a little bit. Some other guys that had a little bit more juice to their name. And yet he goes out in Indianapolis. NFL.com, Lance Zierlein has him ranked as the 3rd best running back with their overall athleticism score of 92. 4.4 in the 40, 1.51 split, 38.5-inch vertical jump, 23 reps in the bench press, and a guy that Jim Nagy at the Senior Bowl said that is such an accomplished pass catcher and route runner that some teams might even try him out as slot receiver. Pretty good value in the 7th round here.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I think as we keep moving forward, there's a good chance he's not here that late. I think the potential of what he can be will outweigh the disappointment that the last 2 years were. Some people forget he was the best player on the field a couple years ago in the Michigan-Ohio State game. That C.J. Stroud was on the field for that game, and he just ran away from Ohio State multiple times, dominated that game. In the Fiesta Bowl stunning loss that they had to TCU, he had an unbelievable game. During that time period, I had no doubt in my mind that he was going to be a better draft prospect than Blake Corum. And then last year was just the weirdest year, just a very weird year at Michigan. One of the, a 15-0 or 16-0 team that, started to throw the ball a little bit more and then fed. Even Blake Corum didn't have as strong of a year as some people thought. He had 1 million touchdowns, but didn't run for a ton of yards. But that defense was so good, that ball controlled, just a weird situation. And then in the national championship game, what does he do? I mean, he just puts his foot on the Huskies' throat, not once, not twice, but 3 times with massive runs where he looked like the best player on the field in that game when he was when you let him cook. And it was even, Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit were like, where's this guy been all year? So what happens? Wins the national championship. He's on the cover of NCAA, the new football video game, the hottest video game in the world when it came out. And what does he do? He loses his job by like week 3 to Kalel Mullins, another guy that's very interesting prospect. And so I don't know if there's an attitude thing there. I don't know if it's just him struggling with Sharon Moore's scheme as things changed, but his ceiling, those highlights look like unbelievable. Reminds me a little bit of a Jay Ajayi type of potential. We're just a big physical back that can break those home runs. but something happened. There's more to this story that I feel like we're not hearing. And then he comes to the combine and looks unbelievable. But like you said, just an inconsistent player.
Yeah, and you just have to wonder if there's maybe an injury we didn't know about. Daniel Jeremiah said it himself. He said it looked like, and he said this at the Senior Bowl, actually. He said it just looks like he has more juice now. So maybe there was just something kind of holding him back athletically.
And maybe a different scheme, a different style of offense will really benefit him. And he doesn't strike me exactly as the most Clint Kubiak kind of guy, but maybe if you can coach him up, that's a guy. This running back class is so good. And we've talked a little before. I have my frustrations with Kenneth Walker. I enjoy Kenneth Walker. I have my frustrations with Zach Charbonnet, but I appreciate him as well. It's one of those things where it seems like that kind of draft class that's Saquon and Derrick Henry made running backs cool again. And I feel like this class is going to be that next wave of, hey, if you're going to keep running too high safety on us, then say hello to Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, Ashton Genty, right? Like, I'm not as high on Marion Hampton as other people, but that's another guy. Like, if you're going to do that, cool. Like, we're not going to run you scat backs anymore, or some of these backs that are a little bit past their prime. Like, we're going to send you a really special class. And even if we keep Walker and Charbonnet, it just feels like good business to draft one of these running backs just in case.
So let's do this before we take some questions for you. I saw something today that was intriguing to me, and we've known for a couple of days now that the Raiders are shopping Michael Mayer, right? A guy that was considered by some to be tight end one coming out a couple of years ago, and out of Notre Dame, preceded Mitchell Evans there. And then obviously they get Brock Bowers last year, and I don't understand why they'd shop him. He's cheap for the next 2 years, last 2 years of his rookie deal. Like, I would think Chip Kelly could put some really cool packages together in 12 personnel using both those guys. Doesn't make sense to me, other than maybe they just have so many needs. They're trying to milk what they can out of every resource that they possibly have. Seahawks need a tight end. We don't know if Noah Fant's going to be on this roster moving forward because he has a $13.5 million cap hit. And that would leave A.J. Barner and then really nothing else. Even Brady Russell's a restricted free agent. The idea of trading for Mayer, and then somebody today suggested, somebody that covers the Raiders, what if the Seahawks traded Zach Charbonnet to the Raiders for Michael Mayer straight up? Pete Carroll certainly loves him some Charbonnet. Chip Kelly had him at UCLA, raved about him when he was on the radio here after he was drafted. He's a guy that would fit whatever he wants to do down there, and would still have a couple of cheap years on it. It kind of seems like it matches up, considering the need at tight end for the Seahawks, the depth we have at running back with Kenny McIntosh finally getting a chance to show what he could do at the end of last year, and the fact that this running back, as you say, is so good that John Schneider himself even raved about it the other day without even really being prompted about it. They could dip into that class, take a guy, and get a stud tight end to pair with Barner. What do you think of a trade like that?
It's fun. It's a really cool, interesting trade that feels like a win-win for both parties involved, which for us Pete Carroll lovers, we love to have that happen and stuff. So I was a huge... Yeah, absolutely. Charbonnet had some good games. He had some bad games. And I think we saw the best out of Charbonnet this year, which is a fine football player, but it's not the guy that I feel like is going to be, if this is still a thing, a franchise back. Kenneth Walker, I have some concerns about him and what he will do in the Kubiak scheme. But if he does buy in, that could be something really special. Charbonnet, I feel like we kind of saw what he's going to be, which is a good player. But I think there are guys you can get in the third, the fourth, maybe even the fifth round that I think will have a higher ceiling and potential future than what Charbonnet has provided in Seattle so far. Michael Mayer, I was a big fan of his. He was my number one tight end coming out of that class. Probably went to the worst possible place to go. Quarterback hell in Vegas right now. I say yes to that trade. And I'm not trying to make anything light of a situation, but he did not play I believe it was the 6 games of the year due to some personal issues. So if I'm running a franchise, I'm going to want to know every single thing that happened and why did he miss those games? Did he miss those games because he's pissed that Brock Bowers got drafted, right? And then I'm a little bit like, well, I don't like that you're not competing, but I also, Brock Bowers is the best tight end prospect since Rob Gronkowski, right? So like, sucks, but like, that it's just, that's the way it works in the NFL. And hey, come over to Seattle. If there's more to the story, more type of an attitude, or if there's anything else that, serious mental health stuff, I don't know, but it's very rare for you to see a player miss almost half the year because of personal reasons. So
yeah.
figure out what that is, and then I'm interested.
And it'd be interesting to know and to go back and look and see how much work the Seahawks did on Mayer when he was coming out. I don't know off the top of my head right now. Like if they met with him at the Combine, Senior Bowl, I don't think he was a 30 visit. I think that would have stuck out. But that might be telling, certainly.
But if he's good, you do that trade right now. Like there's no doubt in my mind the positional value of a strong number 2 tight end who could be a number 1 tight end for a number 2 running back that is very clearly in Seattle's eye the number 2 running back in Seattle. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, and it's the kind of trade we don't see that often anymore. Usually it's a guy being unloaded because he's cost too much or he's getting a little up there in age or whatever. This would be a really rare opportunity for both teams to just swap a guy in the same year of their contract, and that would fit kind of a similar need. This is a cool question. I get this a lot. Most post-combine mocks I see now are mocking, this is from Solarius, mocking the Seahawks different players that aren't offensive line, and that's crazy. So talk again about the strength of this draft, because this is what I've been doing, and I've been trying to educate people on this for months, that this, especially the interior offensive line group, it's a good year not to really need a tackle because there aren't a lot of obvious, like for sure that guy can stay at tackle and he's got a lot of upside. But interior offensive line, it's a good year to be the Seahawks. It's a good year to need someone there because there's a lot of depth there. And that's why, and we touched on it earlier, that's why I usually don't go offensive line in the first round to answer this person's question, because I know that I can turn around in the second or third and then even double down again on day 3 and get a guy that's almost just as good, if not even better, considering scheme fit. I can get that guy at 50 and even 82.
Yeah, I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth, right? A franchise left tackle is just different. That's the thing that tilts the draft, that brings, people are willing to trade future picks and move up for it. You don't see people trading up to take a guard. You just don't. But you know what I watched in the Super Bowl this year? I watched, Trey Smith have a fantastic year leading his team to the Super Bowl. Obviously didn't work out in the game. And I watched the interior offensive line of the Philadelphia Eagles dominate this season and hold up to allow Jalen Hurts to cook in that Super Bowl. And that's just, and where do they get those guys? Juergens, right? I think he was pick 50, right? Dickerson, some of these guys, they're not first round picks. And that just speaks to what this draft is. I think Rob Staten talked about this, and I completely agree. He says he has like 15 dynamic interior offensive line prospects in this draft, which is a very high amount. I have around 15 to 17 that I really like. You get one of those guys, you don't have to take them at 18. The whole world knows. John Schneider knows. Everyone knows the Seahawks need to fix the offensive line. We're going to find out a lot about how much they need to fix the offensive line over the next 2 or 3 weeks. If a certain prize interior offensive lineman finds his way to Seattle, I think a lot of people are going to stop not saying it's a bad comment or anything, but if a Drew Dahlman, if Seattle changes the narrative and just says, we hear you, relax, we hear you. Here's the best center, arguably in the NFL, right? One of the 2 or 3 best centers in the NFL. That's 26. We just signed him. It's going to cost us $20 million. So I don't want to hear you guys complain anymore. But that completely changes that dynamic where, yeah, you can wait and stuff. But it's just so deep that you can go get, like, I love Gray Zabel. But if Colston Loveland happens to fall to you at pick 18, there is no debate in my mind. If I can get a franchise type of tight end / wide receiver in Colston Loveland, I'm going that route. If Jahdae Barron is now not going to because he just dominated the combine, the best defensive back in college football this year, if he fell to you, people would be pissed, right? The ones that aren't in the know. Another defensive back, what are you doing? Right. In my opinion, the potential ceiling of Jahdae Barron is so much higher than some of these offensive linemen that I send you mocks every single night of how much I love these offensive linemen because there's so many good ones that I can even wait till pick 82 and I can still walk away with a guy that I think will be a starter right away. It's
And
just you got to take the draft the way it comes to you, and offensive linemen are going to keep coming to you. That's the nice thing about this class.
Yeah, because if you go line at 18, then the defensive tackle class, if you want one of those, really drops off before 50. Some of the edge guys, you're picking through sort of the leftovers where, you touched on it, but just to give some specific examples, like I think most of the fan base really wants Tyler Booker or Gray Zabel at 18. Those are the guys they've heard the most about, learned the most about, and they know would be a great pick at 18. But I'm telling you, Ratledge at 50, I could throw a bunch of other guys out there. I'll take Luke Kandra at 50 all day long. I'll take even Lidge's teammates, Jared Wilson, who I think might be the best center in the draft. That's a little high for Dylan Fairchild, but you get my point, right? Clay Webb, I think, is a perfect zone fit and a guy that you could get maybe at 82 even. There's a bunch of dudes, and then, some of the tackle/guard guys too, like a Jalen Rivers or a Miles Frazier, who I thought ran and moved much better in the movement drills yesterday than I expected to. Just to name a bunch of examples there. If you don't, and the way the draft is structured now, we all have to go to bed now after the first round, and so it makes it a little bit more anxiety-inducing if you're waiting on a certain position group. If the Seahawks don't take an offensive lineman in the first round, and again, a lot can change between now and then with the roster. We might not even feel like we need one by then. Don't fret, because the draft is built to take care of that need later on. Corey asks, love the trench depth in this draft. Would also love to hear your thoughts on the linebacker draft board sleepers. Talked about a couple linebackers earlier. Begin with that idea of sort of finding an upgrade over Drake Thomas, who I like, and the team loves him, loves the above the shoulder stuff. They say he's one of the smartest linebackers on the roster, but just, a guy that has physical length limitations, and his ceiling is what it is. Thinking about some guys in this class, maybe they're flying under the radar that some fans wouldn't know that can cover, play probably more of that weak side alongside Knight and Jones. Maybe he's a third linebacker at times, or even a guy that can spell with the green dot if need be at Mike linebacker. Some under the radar guys.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I think this is a pretty poor linebacker class. I've been talking up this class as a whole, but this is one of those just very clear weak spots. Like I said, if you're not getting one of those first 2 or 3 guys, there's a massive drop off. Like we're talking, Campbell's going to go round 1 most likely, and Stutzman's going to go maybe day 2, at the very end of day 2, maybe early day 3. And then you're looking at a drop that might go all the way until like well into the 5th round before you start seeing some of these linebackers go off the board. Some guys I do like. I like Jack Kaiser out of Notre Dame. I thought he was a very pleasant surprise in coverage in the college football playoff. I thought he held his own as much as possible against Tyler Warren in that semifinal Orange Bowl game. That was one of Warren's I won't say it was one of his worst games, but that was definitely Drew Aller's worst game. But it was one of those scenarios where I thought he didn't look like he didn't belong on the same field as Tyler Warren, and I think that's an extreme compliment. I thought he struggled in the national championship game. I think Chip Kelly called a near perfect first 3 quarters, though. But just a solid linebacker that can probably spell it, like with the green dot, like you said. That also is a little bit surprising in coverage. I can't remember if he ran a 40 or some of his numbers, but I know that he's a guy that has been a pleasant surprise, and his tape looked really good in the college football playoff overall. Another guy that I really like, that's kind of in that tweener range where you're not quite sure, can he play linebacker, and so he might be that nice fit on the side, is Cody Simon from Ohio State. Kind of the heart and soul of that defense from that perspective, other than Jack Sawyer. I believe he was the defensive MVP of the national championship game, had a few sacks in that game, made a lot of big plays. He's just a little bit undersized, and so it's just that question of how does he hold up in the run game. But I think we're talking about finding Mike McDonald some weapons. I think he's a difficult guy on the offense to how do you scheme against him if he shows up on the field. So again, I think this is a really, honestly, one of the rougher linebacker classes that I can remember. It really points to the need of re-signing Ernest Jones, which Ernest Jones is not dumb. He knows this, so he's going to get very well compensated by the Seahawks because of that. It's also a weak linebacker class in free agency, so this is not working out well for Seattle financially, but is working out very well for Ernest Jones. But Jack Kaiser and Cody Simon would be my late day 3 picks that I would be very interested in selecting.
Jeffrey Bossa is another guy that really stood out to me in Mobile. Yep. I think he played some Mike at Oregon. He looks more like a weak side guy, just rocked up. Looks like he was built in a lab. He's got some leadership qualities. Another guy that is kind of flying under the radar for me.
Yep.
Let's see. Solarius asked, was Dart the only quarterback the Seahawks interviewed, or did they interview more quarterbacks? Only saw an article saying Dart was the only one. I think they met with yours at the combine. I think I saw confirmation of that. But this is leading me to another question. Let me ask you about, and assuming that, as we all expect, sometime in the next week, we'll probably hear news of an extension for Geno Smith, that he's going to be locked in as the starter for 2025 and beyond, although I think the contract will be structured in a way similar to his last one, similar to what Matthew Stafford's going to agree to in LA, where it's sort of a year-to-year proposition. If the right guy presents himself at 18, does it make sense with the way this roster is built now for the Seahawks to take a quarterback?
Yes, it does. And one reason why I say that is the factors that are leading into next season. So the 49ers are in some form of turmoil. Obviously, they lost Deebo Samuel, which some people might say that's a positive for them. That's a big cap hit. Brandon Ayuk, that was a serious injury. We're not sure what that team's going to look like, right? Even if you put Membo on that team as kind of like a future replacement for Trent Williams, it just looked off. There's just a lot of smoke you're hearing about Jed York and John Lynch and Shanahan. It doesn't seem like paradise like it did a year ago, right? McCaffrey wasn't healthy. You look at the Rams, there was obviously some real smoke going on there with Matthew Stafford. He did not have a great year last year. I think it's very interesting that they decided to pay him. I think a lot of that has to do with McVay being like, hey, I want another run or two at this before I go move onto something else that's a little bit less stressful, that's going to pay me a lot more money, involving a microphone and calling some NFL games. But that team, other than Fisk and Jared Verse, feels like they're kind of on, hey, we need to get to the Super Bowl in the next year or two, or else we're going to have to really start over on the offensive side. So there's a lot of turmoil in the NFC West, right? And then you have a third place schedule, and the odds are in your favor this year because you get the AFC South and the NFC South, historically known as the two worst divisions in football every single year. So you have all this building up into a scenario where you can run it back. And you've been a big part of this, saying run it back, run this whole thing back, keep as many of the guys as you can, don't rock the boat. And you give Geno an extension. I think this team has that. Looks like a 10-11 win team if things get right, and Mike continues to build that defense, and Clint can do something with the offense. But because of that schedule, you get the Buccaneers at home, you get the Houston Texans at home, which most years is a good thing, maybe not right now with our home problems. But that schedule makes me think, don't be surprised if the Seahawks win 12, 13 games and are hosting multiple home playoff games, because the schedule is that poor, and because I really feel like the NFC West is in this weird teetering moment where we're not sure what the future of the Rams and the Seahawks are. So you do that. That doesn't mean you have to hit a home run at pick 18. I don't need a Jahad Campbell to come in and to turn the defense from 11 to 5, right? I don't need to take a number one wide receiver or Colson Level. I would love those guys. I would take those guys over Dart, I think, is the kind of guy we're maybe talking about here. If you want to talk about Shedeur falling to you at 18, I think it's worth a discussion. I wouldn't do it, but I think it's worth the discussion. I like Quinn Ewers. You know how I feel about Will Howard. He's one of my favorite prospects in this whole class. But those guys, they're not going to get picked at 18. That's just the way it is. Dart is the guy that has elevated himself up to that point where his ceiling looks like he could go late in the first round or middle of the first round. And in a lot of scenarios, I would say no, I wouldn't take him there. But I actually think the best scenario for Dart's future is in that Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, Kubiak scheme. I don't know if there's a more perfect place. NFL is all about environment. What team, what culture, what type of system are you in? And I think Dart is the kind of guy that can be I'm not trying to speak. I think this is a compliment. This is a guy that can be a souped up Brock Purdy, like a much more dynamic Brock Purdy. Maybe not be as Brock is one of the best pocket manipulators, and that's a big reason why he's been so successful. But Dart has more athleticism, has more of an arm that I really think can be really dynamic with a DK Metcalf and a JSN. And again, we're talking about let him sit for a whole year and learn the system behind Geno Smith. Don't be surprised. He's not that, but don't be surprised if this is an Alex Smith, Pat Mahomes type situation where Dart comes in and immediately looks like a Pro Bowl type guy because he had time to go into the system. Because I think the move from Lane Kiffin's offense to the NFL is going to be difficult for Dart. The best spot for him is Lane Kiffin's system into the Kubiak system. I think that's a very QB friendly system where there's a couple reads and then go use your legs, son. I think that's a good fit.
Well, I'll tell you this too. If the Seahawks do fall in love with Jackson Dart and see him as the future and want to get him, then they probably can't they can't get cute and try to move down and acquire other assets and think you might get him either, because I think the Rams are going to be lurking and looking for the next guy with Stafford's situation. I think he's a good fit there, as you mentioned, and I could see them trying to leapfrog the Seahawks and beat them to it. Yeah, I could absolutely see that. Let's see what else we got here from, the one I've got on the screen. Sorry about that. Dominic Scott. We didn't really go too deep into Nick Emenwari. Obviously blew up the combine. His two most common comps that he's getting are Cam Chancellor and Kyle Hamilton, who obviously Mike McDonald had a lot of success with in Baltimore. He'd be a third safety. He'd be that box guy, very similar to the role that they put Hamilton into when McDonald took over there. Which one carries more weight? Because I have a hard time wrapping my head around taking a safety at 18 and just the value there, no matter what kind of athletic freak this guy is. Or am I off base here and this guy is just the ceiling's too high and it would make sense?
I think I'm more of the former. Like I said earlier, I really like that South Carolina defense. If you're drafting Nick Emenwari and thinking you're getting Cam Chancellor, that's not the case. He looks like Cam Chancellor. He doesn't play like Cam Chancellor and stuff. No. And so I also don't know if a Cam Chancellor can survive in the NFL these days. I feel like they're going to get fined and suspended so many times, but
which not who he is, as you said, you don't see reps on tape of him blowing guys up. That's not his game.
Yeah. The Kyle Hamilton comp is very fair, and the connection is very fair. So it wouldn't surprise me if you see Seattle take him. I think if you're going to take Nick Emenwari, you're trading back, right? There's somebody that really wants Jackson Dart, or there's somebody that really wants that last offensive piece before you kind of hit that little bit of a dead spot, and someone wants to jump the Rams. That's where that spot makes sense, and that's where I actually do think Seattle or it kind of fits in that realm of being a nice trade back option, as long as you're fine if one of those guys don't fall that John's looking for. I like Nick. I probably wouldn't take him before pick 25.
Tasha says if we can trade back, this might be the year. There's so many good players that might actually be better this time around. The more I look at this class, I agree. I don't think there's any coincidence that the day that the DK Metcalf Green Bay Packers stuff came out was the day after the defensive tackles and edge players ran at the combine, because, you can imagine John Schneider and Mike McDonald looking at that group and then looking at each other and going, we're going to need a couple of those guys. Like I want multiple players out of this group and try to take more bites of the apple there. I'm this draft. The more I look at it, I'm absolutely trying to trade down. And while some might say, well, it's going to be tough to find a trade partner though, because there aren't as many blue chip players, I would counter with, well, by 18, nobody's got first round picks left on their board. So that's out the window. And it's all about fit and preference. And someone's going to be there at 18 that some team's in love with, that we're not afraid to give up on. And we think we can slide back and get value. It just feels like that's the move.
Yeah, absolutely. I think where I'm at in this draft right now is I have about 5 or 6 guys that there's a chance they're there at 18. And if they're not, I'm trading back. And like you said, someone's going to fall in love with Jackson Dart. Someone's going to the Buffalo Bills, who have a first round pick and 2 middle second round picks. They're going to fall. They need a wide receiver, right? If the fans, they're not hearing it from the fans, they're going to hear it from probably Josh Allen, right? If there's somebody that's going to want to trade up to get him a weapon, there are multiple guys that aren't worthy of pick 18, but someone's going to fall in love with, that I really do think of all the drafts of the last 4 or 5 years, this one makes a lot of sense where Seattle can go 23, 25, 30 and still, get the value of that 5th-year option in a guy and maybe and find a guy that they want.
I'll give you an example. A guy that doesn't fit every scheme, isn't going to be everybody's cup of tea because he's a little bit short, but the production's off the charts and all the other athletic measurables match up. Like a team needing edge rush help and falling in love with Dominic Ezeraku and wanting to move up and get it. I can see that being a perfect example of a team going, okay, he's at the top of our board. He's not at the top of everybody else's, but we want to make sure we go up and get him.
Hard to deny 16.5 sacks in a college football season. Someone's going to fall in love with that.
Yeah, and almost 40 in his career. I think really productive player. Dominic asked again, saw in a recent mock with us talking about trading back with Buffalo for our second next year for their first 3 picks and a later pick as well. That sounds rich to me based on the trade chart, but to your point, I think Buffalo does make sense as a trade partner. But I wanted to bring this up for one reason, because I'm getting a lot of this. Like, hey, we need to win now. We need to get over this hump. We need to break through this roadblock, get into the playoffs, do some damage. So let's be aggressive about trading next year's. Next year's draft is already expected to be better at the top end, and in particular, much better at the quarterback position potentially. Now, that's always a dicey proposition to look ahead, more so than it used to be because of the NIL. We can't predict a year out which guys are going to come out, which aren't. But because of that, I am not under any circumstances trading high draft capital from next year's draft to get anything done this year, because of the possibility that next year could be as good as we think it is.
Yeah, you're in basically asset collection for next year if you have the opportunity, because right now I have 3 or 4 quarterbacks that I would bet a good amount of money are going to get picked in day 1 of the NFL draft, right? Even if Archie Manning doesn't come back, or he decides to come back to Texas, which from all indications I understand is that it's more likely that he's going to finish out his collegiate years at Texas than go to the NFL next year. Now, if the right team with the right injury falls at pick number 1, the right market, that's definitely a thing. I think, you're going to see some teams that are going to absolutely tank for Manning. I think the New Orleans Saints are definitely in that realm where they want to, reunite the bloodline with the Mannings in New Orleans and stuff. And so Nico from Tennessee, Cade Klubnik, who's a guy I've talked to you about for a while at Clemson. I think we finally saw what his potential was in that ACC championship, and in a brutal environment against Texas when he was clearly outgunned. That dude was an absolute gamer, and that was the most competitive 21-point loss or 14 17-point loss that I've seen. They were in that game till the final 10 minutes, and that was literally just him running for dear life and making incredible throws. There's a few other guys that I'm really high on, but those are the big 3 that are going to go probably in the top 15, top 10 if they all come out.
Yeah, felt like Klubnik just got better as the year went along and really finished out strong. MWM says, I'd much rather pick Kenneth Grant than Eminwari. Safety is luxury in the first round. Hawks need trench help. Grant has been one of my most mocked players when I do my own mocks over the last month or so. And it's for the upside. He's not a finished product. He's a little bit raw, but just an absolute athletic freak, literally on Bruce Feldman's freak list the last 2 years. Thought he was going to blow up the combine. He did, said it himself, and then something came up in his MRI, had a little bit of a hamstring tweak and wasn't able to do all the testing. And now talk about him as a possibility at 18, and also the possibility that his former teammate, Mason Graham, who up until this point was considered a lock to go in the top 5, shows up at the combine, barely 300 pounds, 20 to 30 pounds lighter than he's been listed at Michigan, super short, sawed-off arms, doesn't have a great physique. He might be slipping, and there's some thought that he might even slip into the teens.
Yeah, reminds me a little bit of Kalijah Cansey, if you remember him. Was the best player in college football, best defensive player in college football that year. And then his combine probably cost him a few $1 million in a few draft spots. And Tampa Bay said, yeah, we're fine. We'll take it. It's worth the risk. And it's been a fantastic, selection for them and stuff. He's worked out really well and been a good player. I think Mason Graham doesn't look the part when he gets off the bus. He's not going to look the part in shorts and a tight shirt in Indianapolis. His game tape definitely looks that part. But it kind of also goes back to this thing that makes me a little bit nervous about Kenneth Grant, who I agree with you. If you told me I had to put, money on someone today that I think is the most likely to be selected by Seattle, I actually do think it would be Kenneth Grant. The Michigan connection, the opportunity to pair him and really create this trifecta of this triumvirate of Leo Williams, all pro Leo, Murphy, and then him. I think if John watched the Super Bowl, it's like, man, I can really mess up the best player in the NFL if I just keep penetrating through the middle and I give him nowhere to look straight ahead. And that is one of those things that, a lot of Super Bowl teams that nobody ever really expected to win the Super Bowl, a lot of them have been those guys. The Giants, I think about a lot. Pressure up the middle destroyed Tom Brady. Pressure up the middle destroyed Patrick Mahomes in that Super Bowl. And I'm not saying Kenneth Grant's Jalen Walker, but if you give him less reps and have him learn from Leo and play with with Murphy, Byron Murphy, or Murphy, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like these guys can absolutely destroy the run game and they can destroy the pass rush up the middle. But it is that question. Was Mason awesome and he made Grant great? Was Grant great and he made Graham great? Or are they kind of feeding off of each other? Because so far in this draft process, they haven't looked like the superstars that they look like when they're on tape.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see what else we got here from thanks to all of you for watching tonight. We got a bunch of you in here. And I love the conversation that's going back and forth between everybody while we're talking. I think. I mean, here's another one sort of along the same lines, goes along with Kenneth Grant. And another reason that I do sometimes look elsewhere. And this is why that while Kenneth Grant probably has more of the sort of dynamic upside ceiling at 18, you're going to get out of a defensive tackle. Maybe the only other one that's sort of in that same bucket would be Derek Harmon that might be available at 18. Lots and lots of questions about Walter Nolan. At this point, he's off my board pretty much at this rate. The idea that, and I had been espousing this idea for quite a while that, let's get a people mover or a guy that's hard to move, right? A true zero tech, a nose tackle, someone you can line up over the center and free Byron Murphy up to not have to do that, kind of unlock his pass rush ability and let him focus on playing three tech. But then Mike McDonald himself said that's not necessarily a priority, something they need to happen. But if they do want that guy and they go a different direction at 18, it seems like this year, more so than the last 3 or 4 that I can recall, a lot more 320 plus pound interior defensive linemen in this draft, guys you can get later on and get some value out of, right?
Yeah. Going back to Nolan, what a weird combine for those Ole Miss guys. I feel like almost all of them really underperformed, which is
Mobile was like that too. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is interesting because that team was preseason top 5 or 6 and they underperformed. And so, not trying to read too much into the whole program, but again, I really like Dart. I do like Dart. I have other guys I have ahead of him, but it just really makes you wonder what was going on over there and why that team so underperformed. But yeah, this is another draft class. Daniel Jeremiah talked about it. One of the better defensive tackle drafts. Do you want a pass rushing defense tackle? Cool. We got these 4 or 5 guys. Do you want a guy that's going to eat space? Cool. We got these 4 or 5 guys, right? Nobody's perfect. Again, this is not a blue chip heavy draft. Everyone has their warts and stuff, but you have a strength. And Jeff Simmons, a guy that talks about this often. The draft is not about plugging holes in your weaknesses. Sometimes it's creating a strength and turning it into a Super Bowl level strength, right? And the Philadelphia Eagles are a perfect example of that. They have this nice foundation, this nice structure of baseline of a good team. And now we're going to just overwhelm you with a Nolan Smith as another edge rusher. We're just going to overwhelm you again. We took Jordan Davis. Now we're going to take Jalen Carter, right? It's just wave after wave after wave where they may not be the best secondary or the best linebackers or something like that. But it doesn't matter because you don't have time, right, to get the ball out and stuff. And so a Kenneth Grant makes a lot of sense because it allows Leo to do so many different things. It allows a Byron Murphy to do so many things. If you don't take Grant, there's other defensive tackles that can come in here and provide that allows like a big part of the season is to make sure Byron Murphy starts to reach his potential, what we wanted to see and stuff. And I have full confidence that he's going to do that. But you can find guys in this draft at 18 and at 120 that are going to do that for Murphy and Leo.
Yeah, and that Eagles approach, that's how you're allowed, or you're able to make up for the, they go out and acquire Bryce Huff, and he did nothing for him, and it didn't even matter. Like, he didn't even remember he was on the roster at the end of the year because they were so deep there. But yeah, to your point, and Dominic here again on the screen, you wait, you take another premium position or a guy that's high on your board at 18, and then a guy like Alfred Collins, another one of those players. He's not quite Tavondre Sweat, who played side by side with Byron Murphy at Texas, but pretty darn close as a guy that would be really tough to move there in the middle for sure. And OFG dude says, speaking of the Eagles, they just keep drafting Georgia Bulldogs. I'm sure that's not going to change this year. Some of those guys are going to end up in Philly, both on the offensive and defensive line. Probably you could do worse than just drafting Georgia players, as you said, or Wisconsin and Iowa offensive linemen, or
they're
Iowa tight ends, or
they're right, literal and figurative dogs, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this was fun. Things are going to change a lot in the next week or so, certainly with free agency starting unofficially a week from today. We'll know by this time a week from now, even though it's just the official tampering period, we'll know player commitments and signings and agreements being made, and then things get official on the 12th. So between now and then, we're going to find out about Uchenna Nwosu's deal. They moved back, kind of the date on his bonus. We're going to find out maybe about Geno Smith. I don't think we're going to find out anything about DK Metcalf. I think that's going to be, I was talking to Curtis Allen today, I think that's going to be something that happens later in the summer, sort of a last minute thing to free up cap space after all the moves have already been made. But we'll probably part with Tyler Lockett sometime in the next week. This is the week every year that can be tough, but these are the teams, the ones that make the smart decisions between now and the start of free agency, are usually the ones that come out on top, right?
Absolutely, right? I think we've all watched over the last decade or so the Miami Dolphins, and they win free agency every year. And how many playoff wins have they had in the last 20 years, right? Like, there's also that change of finding the right guys. The Philadelphia Eagles went out and found a Zach, Bond, right? Like, that guy is about to make so much money, and he was one of the biggest impacts in free agency. A Saquon Barkley, right? Free agency, it's not about getting the biggest splash. It's about finding the right player at the right price that can come in and get you to the next level. And Seahawks fans that have been around for the last 10 years, we saw that with Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett. That completely changed the dynamic of the defense, and they went from a really good defense to a legendary defense. And you're not going to hit that every year. The Philadelphia Eagles are not going to hit, Saquon Barkley every year, and not every team's going to do that. But it's finding the right guys that can get you 2 more wins. That changes the trajectory of your franchise. And I'm going to keep saying it again. There's one guy I'm looking at here for an offensive line addition that I think could really change the direction of the Seahawks franchise.
The problem is every single team that wants an interior offensive lineman, particularly your center, that team is eyeing Drew Dalman. It's every other podcast like this is talking about going after Drew Dalman. The 49ers are, like, their fans think he's locked up because he went to Stanford. Like, that's a done deal. It's it's, and I would like to caution the fan base that, to your point, it's not necessarily about, like, you don't have to spend the most to win the offseason or to improve your team. Carolina Panthers went out last year and spent $150 million on 2 guards. And what did that get them? Right? Like, just throwing money at a problem isn't the solution. You have to pick the right players. You have to evaluate properly. And what does give me confidence that it's going to be different this year is, I think, more so than in the past, I think the head coach has massive influence on what John Schneider is going to do, and is really, really outspoken about what he wants and has been involved in the process. And I think you see it from the list of prospects that they've met with at the combine. It's like 70% offensive linemen. Like, that's where the focus has been, And so I would tell people that are skeptical because they've heard it before and it hasn't quite worked out, that this is the offseason that will tell us the most. And if it doesn't work and it's a bad one, and the team doesn't go anywhere, doesn't elevate between now and the end of the year, that we might be talking about some guys' jobs being on the line. So great
Absolutely.
to have you back on the show. It's been far too long. Remind people again what you got coming up.
Yeah, should be starting here in the next few weeks over at Field Goals for SB Nation. Very excited about that opportunity to work for Mookie Alexander and our mutual friend Bryce and everyone over there at that team that they're putting together. Really excited as we're heading into draft season. And yeah, it's a really cool opportunity that I'm very thankful for, and I'm excited for you guys to see what I'm writing about over there.
All right, that's going to do it. You can follow him at Michael T_05 on Twitter. Follow me at Seahawks Forever on Twitter and Blue Sky. I know I haven't been as active on Blue Sky lately and posting all my stuff over there, but I'll get better about it. Thanks again, Michael. Really appreciate it. We'll talk again soon as we get closer to the draft and things are solidified a little bit more with the roster after free agency has settled down. Until then, forever and always, go Hawks.